The human ship glided silently through the void, its hull gleaming under the light of a distant star. Commander Jalen Hart, the human engineer assigned to the mission, sat in the cockpit studying the holographic map of the alien system. Unlike the sprawling human colonies, this part of the galaxy was controlled by the Zarathi Empire, a civilization obsessed with perfection and genetic superiority. To them, humans were a minor species, weak and crude, unworthy of recognition. Jalen knew that going here was dangerous, but he also knew that humans had something no one else did: creativity, adaptability, and determination. Traits that could turn the tide in situations even the most perfect aliens could not handle. The ship entered the Zarathi capital orbit. Towers of crystal and metal reflected the twin suns, shining like a city of diamonds. On the landing platform, a delegation waited. At their head was Lady Kalara, one of the Empire's most esteemed nobles. Her posture was flawless, her face sculpted in the way Zarathi beauty demanded, and her gaze was cold, sharp, and calculating. "You are human," she said, her voice melodic but dripping with disdain. "The Empire has heard rumors of your kind. Weak, primitive. Nothing more than a curiosity." Jalen remained calm. He had expected this. "I am aware," he said. "But I also know that appearances can be deceiving. I am here to assist, not to fight." Kalara's eyes narrowed. "Assist? Your bloodline is inferior. How can you possibly assist one of the greatest civilizations in the galaxy?" Jalen smiled slightly, perhaps in ways you would not expect. Her lips twitched in what might have been a sneer, or the closest thing to a smile her kind allowed. She led him into the city, her guards flanking them like statues. The streets were immaculate, not a speck of dust in sight. Vehicles floated silently, and citizens moved with perfect precision. Every step, every movement seemed designed to display control and superiority. Yet Jalen noticed subtle flaws that Kalara did not. Tiny cracks in the city's power grids, inefficiencies in the automated transport, and subtle design mistakes in the water filtration systems. These were things a human engineer could fix, and he filed them mentally for later. They arrived at a vast building that served as the noblewoman's estate. Inside, Kalara displayed a mixture of beauty and intimidation. Crystal walls reflected light across the marble floors. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing complex data about genetic lineages, technological projects, and interstellar trade. "You will remain here while we decide how to use your talents," Kalara said. "You will be tested. If you fail, you will be returned to your ship immediately." "Do not waste our time, human." Jalen bowed respectfully. "Understood." The first test came the next day. Kalara led him to a large chamber filled with alien machinery, devices he had never seen before. Lights pulsed across panels and streams of data moved faster than any human eye could track. "This device," Kalara explained, pointing to a complex system, "controls the energy flow of our city's defensive grid. It has malfunctioned repeatedly. Our engineers cannot solve it. You may try. You will fail, but perhaps your primitive mind will amuse us." Jalen studied the device carefully. He noticed patterns the aliens had overlooked, small fluctuations in energy that caused the system to short-circuit. He carefully adjusted a few settings, rewrote a sequence of commands, and then stepped back. The chamber hummed. Light stabilized. Energy readings flattened. The defensive grid returned to perfect function. Kalara's eyes widened slightly, though she tried to hide it. That should not have been possible," Jalen shrugged. "Sometimes solutions are simpler than expected. Observation and patience can do more than brute perfection." A murmur ran through the room. Kalara waved a hand, silencing her attendants. "You are unusual, human. Perhaps not entirely useless." Despite her words, she could not mask her curiosity. Over the next few days, Jalen was given increasingly difficult tasks. Each time he solved problems that had baffled the Zarathi engineers for decades. A water recycling system that kept losing efficiency, a transport module that stalled during critical tests, even a prototype of a new spacecraft that kept misfiring thrusters. And each time Kalara watched him closely. Her scorn slowly shifted to a quiet fascination, though she would never admit it. One evening, as the twin suns set over the crystal city, Kalara observed Jalen repairing a section of the estate's energy grid. The light of the suns reflected off his concentrated face. His hands moved with precision and confidence. For a moment, she saw something she had never seen before, Not weakness, not imperfection, but potential. Human, she said finally, breaking the silence. Why do you continue to succeed when every step seems impossible? Jalen looked up, his expression calm. Because humans are adaptable. Because we do not rely solely on strength or perfection. We find ways to survive. We find ways to improve. That is why we endure, Lady Kaylara. She looked away, pretending to examine the holographic displays. Yet inside a storm of thoughts churned. Her world had always been perfect, predictable, and now this human, this being she had dismissed as inferior, challenged everything she believed. The following morning, Kaylara summoned the human to the central council chamber. Her attendants and senior officials waited, curious about the human who had so quietly upset their expectations. You have done well, she said formally. Better than any Zarathi engineer would dare claim. Perhaps there is value in your species after all, Jalen bowed. Thank you. I am here to help in any way I can. Kaylara studied him. Help. That is an interesting choice of words for a species that has been dismissed as weak for centuries. Very well. Tomorrow you will accompany me on a mission. A demonstration of your abilities will be required. Failure is not an option. The mission was simple on paper. Inspect a newly constructed orbital facility and ensure its systems functioned correctly. But Kaylara knew, as did Jalen, that the test would not just measure technical skill. It would measure adaptability, judgment, and composure under pressure. As they departed for the facility, Kaylara glanced at him from the corner of her eye. Do not think your successes will make me trust you, she said quietly. I do not trust humans. I have seen too many fail. Jalen smiled faintly. I do not seek your trust, Lady Kaylara. I seek to prove that humans can do what others cannot. Sometimes that is enough. For the first time, Kaylara felt a flicker of doubt in her certainty of human inferiority. It was small, fleeting, but undeniable. The thought disturbed her more than she would admit. The orbital facility rose before them, gleaming against the backdrop of space. Its systems were sophisticated, the design elegant, yet several anomalies were visible even to Jalen's trained eye. He pointed them out calmly, explaining potential fixes and improvements. Kaylara listened, fascinated despite herself. The council had never seen a human operate with such confidence and precision, yet without arrogance. It was unsettling and remarkable at the same time. By the end of the day, the facility was fully operational, improved in ways that no Zarathi engineer had predicted. Kaylara's expression remained neutral in public, but privately she began to feel an unfamiliar respect and a confusing sense of admiration. As they returned to the city, Kaylara spoke softly. Perhaps your bloodline is not as weak as I thought. Jalen nodded politely. Perhaps humans are stronger than they appear. Strength is measured in many ways, Lady Kaylara. She said nothing more but could not stop thinking about him. The human who had been scorned, underestimated, and dismissed had quietly proven that he was capable of things even the greatest Zarathi could not imagine. And for the first time, she wondered what else this human could achieve. That night, she watched the twin suns set again, and for a moment, she allowed herself a single thought. This human could change everything she thought she knew about the galaxy, and perhaps even about herself. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. The human who had entered her world as a curiosity, a being of weak bloodline, would soon prove that true strength comes from determination, ingenuity, and heart, qualities no empire, no matter how perfect, could ignore. The sun rose over the crystal city, its light scattering across the towers and streets of the Zarathi capital. Lady Kaylara stood in the private observation chamber of her estate, watching the human, Jalen Hart, move through the corridors with calm efficiency. She could not deny it. His presence disturbed her. Not in a physical sense, but in a way that tugged at her pride. He was human. Yet he solved problems with a patience and precision that few Zarathi could match. And every time he succeeded, her scornful assumptions about his weak bloodline wavered. This morning she had a new challenge for him. A laboratory in the heart of the city had been struggling to calibrate a complex environmental control system. The system was supposed to regulate air, water, and energy in the city simultaneously, a task the Empire's finest engineers had failed repeatedly. You will go to the laboratory, she said, her voice measured but carrying a sharp edge. If you fail, your services will no longer be required. Jalen inclined his head. I understand. I will do my best. Kelara turned on her heel, silently curious about what he would do. She followed him at a distance just to observe. She did not trust humans, but she could not resist watching him work. The laboratory was a vast room filled with humming machines and flowing streams of glowing data. Zarathi engineers moved through it like clockwork, adjusting levers, pressing holographic keys, and consulting data screens. Yet the system was unstable. Alarms flashed intermittently, and small sparks flew from overloaded circuits. Jalen walked calmly among them, examining the panels, reading the data streams, and listening to the engineers' concerns. He did not rush. Instead, he observed patterns in the energy fluctuations that had gone unnoticed. Small cycles of overload followed precise intervals, timing errors the engineers had failed to correct because they relied solely on brute calculations. He knelt by a console, adjusting settings, rerouting energy flows, and rewriting command sequences. Every movement was deliberate, confident, yet gentle. Kelara watched silently from the observation platform above. Her eyes narrowed as she realized what he was doing. He was not simply fixing the problem. He was understanding it, predicting it, and correcting it before it could cause failures. Minutes passed. The room hummed with tension. The engineers waited, unsure of what would happen. And then, almost imperceptibly, the alarm stopped. The sparks vanished. The screen stabilized. The system flowed like a river, perfectly synchronized. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The engineers, who had spent months trying and failing, stared at Jalen in disbelief. Kelara's eyes widened slightly, though she immediately covered it with a neutral expression. You succeeded, she said finally, her voice measured but carrying an edge of incredulity. I did not expect this, Jalen smiled faintly. Sometimes success comes not from strength or perfection, but from patience and careful observation. The room remained silent for a moment. Then one of the senior engineers approached Jalen, bowing deeply. Human, we did not believe it possible. Your understanding is remarkable. Kelara turned sharply, her eyes flashing. Do not mistake his success for greatness. This is merely a fortunate outcome. Yet inside, she felt a stirring of something unfamiliar. Admiration, curiosity, even a hint of jealousy. How could a human, a creature she had long scorned, surpass what her civilization had deemed impossible? Over the next several days, Kelara put Jalen through a series of increasingly difficult tests. Each one was designed not just to challenge his intellect, but also to test his judgment and adaptability. He repaired failing spacecraft navigation systems, restored unstable energy grids, and corrected environmental controls in failing colonies. Each time he used methods the Zarathi would never have considered. He relied on observation, experimentation, and intuition, skills the aliens often dismissed as primitive. Yet every success deepened Kelara's internal conflict. Her pride demanded that she continue to scorn him. Her logic demanded that she dismiss humans as inferior. But her eyes, her mind, could not ignore the evidence. One evening, as Jalen worked late in the laboratory, Kelara approached him quietly. The chamber was bathed in soft, glowing light from the city beyond. You continue to succeed, she said quietly, almost as if speaking to herself. Explain yourself. Why are humans capable of what we cannot achieve? Jalen looked up from the console, calm and patient. We are not stronger than your kind, he said softly. But we do not rely solely on strength or perfection. We use ingenuity, persistence, and observation. We adapt. That is how humans endure. Kelara studied him. His face was calm, his movements precise, his eyes steady. She saw no arrogance, no vanity, only confidence and competence. It was unnerving. Confidence is not the same as capability, she said, trying to maintain her scorn. Perhaps, Jalen replied, but capability is shown through results, not assumptions. For a long moment, Kelara said nothing. She wanted to argue, to dismiss him, to remind herself of her superiority, but she could not. The evidence was too clear. The following day, Kelara decided to test him in a more public setting. The city council had requested improvements to a fleet of transport vessels. The ships were failing at rates far higher than acceptable. She brought Jalen to the docking station and watched as he examined the vessels. He moved from ship to ship, quickly identifying structural weaknesses, software errors, and energy inefficiencies. Crew members and engineers followed him closely, taking notes and asking questions. Kaylara could not help but notice the way he commanded attention, not through authority, but through competence. Every instruction he gave was clear, every correction precise, every solution effective. Hours passed and the fleet was fully operational. The council members exchanged whispers, impressed beyond measure. They had never seen a human operate with such skill. Kaylara's eyes lingered on him, conflicted. "Your bloodline is unusual," she said softly when they were alone. "It should not possess these qualities, and yet, you surpass what we expected?" Jalen smiled faintly. "Perhaps your expectations were limited." She stared at him, feeling a strange mix of irritation and fascination. For centuries, her people had believed in absolute superiority, and yet this human, a creature she had dismissed as weak, had quietly proven them wrong. That night, Kaylara could not sleep. She walked along the balcony of her estate, staring out at the city lights. In her mind, she replayed every moment she had watched Jalen work, every problem he had solved, every method he had used. She felt something she had never allowed herself to feel before: curiosity and admiration. The next morning, Kaylara made a decision. She would observe him more closely. She would challenge him further, not out of scorn, but out of a desire to understand. Jalen, for his part, remained unaware of the depth of her internal struggle. He continued to work with quiet focus, solving problems and earning the reluctant respect of her people. He had come to the Zarathi Empire as an outsider, dismissed as weak and insignificant. Yet each success built a foundation for something greater, and Kaylara, despite herself, began to see the truth. Perhaps humans were not defined by their appearance or their bloodline. Perhaps strength was more than genetics, more than perfection. Perhaps it was in the mind, the heart, and the will to endure. The chapter closed with a simple fact. The human had begun to change her perception of everything she had believed. And the Zarathi Empire would never be the same. Little did Kaylara know these tests were only the beginning. Soon a crisis would arise that would force her to rely on Jalen in ways that would challenge not only her pride, but also the very foundation of her beliefs. And when that moment came, she would see clearly what she had begun to suspect. Humans were capable of greatness in ways no Zarathi had imagined. The city of the Zarathi Empire shimmered under the twin suns, a perfect display of order and precision. Yet beneath the calm surface, trouble was brewing. A critical orbital station, responsible for regulating energy across several colonies, had suffered a catastrophic malfunction. Systems that had never failed before were collapsing simultaneously. The situation was dire. If left unresolved, vast sections of the empire could face power outages, environmental instability, and even loss of life. Lady Kaylara received the news in her private council chamber. The other nobles were tense, muttering about the impossibility of fixing such a disaster. Zarathi engineers scrambled, but their calculations conflicted, and their pride prevented them from acknowledging gaps in their methods. Kaylara's thoughts, however, turned immediately to the human, Jalen Hart. She had seen what he could do during the tests, how he approached problems that her engineers could not solve. "Summon him," she ordered, her voice firm. "If anyone can resolve this, it is him." Jalen arrived promptly, calm and composed. He studied the reports and data streams with an intensity that made the Zarathi Council uneasy. Unlike them, he did not panic or argue. He absorbed the information, analyzed patterns, and considered solutions the others could not imagine. "This is a serious failure," Kaylara said, her tone sharp. "It is far beyond a simple repair. The systems are intertwined in ways that cannot be untangled without risk." Jalen nodded. "I understand. But risk can be managed. The solution may not be conventional, but it exists." Kaylara watched him, tension and curiosity mixing in her eyes. For the first time, she felt the faint sting of admiration and a bit of fear. This human, whom she had once scorned, might save her empire when her own people could not. The journey to the orbital station was tense. The transport vessel moved swiftly through the void, its hull reflecting starlight. Kaylara sat quietly, observing Jalen as he reviewed schematics and proposed modifications. He spoke calmly, explaining how each subsystem interacted, how small adjustments could stabilize the larger network. and how alternative pathways could redirect energy to prevent overloads. The crew and engineers listened, some skeptical, some hopeful. Kalara remained silent, studying him with sharp attention. Her pride bristled, but her logic could not ignore the truth. He was correct. Upon arrival, the station's interior was chaotic. Lights flickered, alarms blared intermittently, and air circulation struggled to maintain proper flow. Scifi engineers were exhausted, unsure where to begin. Jalen stepped forward. "We will need to isolate the primary nodes," he said, his voice calm. "Then we can reroute energy incrementally, stabilize the flow, and repair the feedback loops. It will take precision, coordination, and focus, but it can be done." Kalara nodded, allowing him to lead. "You will command the operation," she said. "Failure is not an option." Jalen moved quickly, assigning tasks, adjusting systems, and guiding the team with quiet authority. He explained each step, predicting potential failures before they occurred. The Scifi engineers followed reluctantly at first, but gradually they trusted his guidance. Hours passed. Energy surged, stabilized, then fluctuated again. Each time, Jalen corrected the problem, his mind moving faster than anyone else in the room. Kalara watched him, a mix of tension and awe rising in her chest. Every decision he made was calculated yet flexible. Every adjustment he suggested was logical, yet innovative. At one point, a critical node threatened to overload. The engineers froze, unsure how to proceed. Jalen stepped forward, calmly connecting a secondary circuit to absorb excess energy, preventing a catastrophic failure. The room fell silent. The node stabilized. Kalara felt a jolt of admiration she could not deny. She had never seen someone act with such clarity under pressure, combining knowledge, intuition, and courage in perfect balance. By the end of the day, the station's systems were fully restored. Energy flowed smoothly, life support functions stabilized, and the orbital station hummed with quiet efficiency. The Scifi engineers looked on, stunned by the humans' capability. Kalara stepped forward, her expression carefully neutral. "You have done what no Scifi engineer could," she said softly. "You saved this station, perhaps even lives." Jalen nodded respectfully. "I did what I could. The systems were flawed, but they were solvable. Sometimes, solutions require more than calculation. They require observation, understanding, and adaptation." A murmur ran through the council members who had arrived via communication link. "Incredible," one whispered. "A human achieved what we could not." Kalara's pride bristled, yet she could not dismiss the truth. "This human may not be as weak as we once thought," she admitted quietly, almost to herself. The crisis passed, but its effect lingered. The council would never forget that a human, a creature from a supposedly inferior bloodline, had corrected what they could not. And Kalara, who had scorned him openly, found herself reevaluating everything she believed about humans. Later that evening, in her private quarters, Kalara observed Jalen as he reviewed reports and suggested improvements for the orbital station's long-term stability. She could not help but notice the quiet confidence in his movements, the calm intelligence in his expressions, and the way he inspired even the most skeptical Scifi to follow his instructions. "You continue to impress," she said softly when he paused and looked up. "It is unsettling." Jalen smiled faintly. "I do not intend to unsettle anyone, Lady Kalara. I only wish to solve problems and to show that humans are capable of more than assumptions suggest." She studied him. Her thoughts conflicted. Pride demanded she maintain her scorn. Logic demanded she acknowledge the truth. Yet her emotions, though she would not admit them, were drawn toward admiration. "You approach challenges differently than my people," she said. "You combine observation with intuition, strategy with patience. It is unusual." "Perhaps unusual is necessary for survival," Jalen replied. "Sometimes perfection cannot account for creativity or adaptability. That is where humans excel." Kalara remained silent, considering his words. She had always believed that Scifi perfection was absolute, and yet this human had proven that it was not. That strength came in many forms, and sometimes the underestimated could surpass the expected. The next day, the council summoned Jalen and Kalara to discuss improvements across the Empire. His suggestions were logical, practical, and innovative. Plans were approved that incorporated human methods of problem-solving into Scifi engineering practices. Whispers circulated among officials and engineers. This human was exceptional. Kaylara observed the reactions, a mixture of pride and unease swirling in her chest. She realized that her scorn had been premature. Humans were not weak. In fact, they were capable of brilliance, resilience, and ingenuity that could change the course of civilizations. That night, as the twin suns set, Kaylara found herself alone on the balcony, staring at the city below. Her mind replayed the events of the past days, the failures, the successes, and the quiet human who had solved them all. She could not deny the truth. Jalen Hart had proven that strength was not defined solely by bloodline or heritage. It was defined by intelligence, perseverance, and the courage to act when others hesitated. For the first time, she allowed herself a thought she had long resisted. This human was remarkable. Not weak, not inferior. Remarkable. And in the quiet of the evening, Kaylara made a silent decision. She would continue to challenge him, to observe him, to learn from him, because if humans were capable of this much already, what else might they achieve? Little did she know the challenges ahead would test not only Jalen's skill, but also her pride and understanding. Soon she would have to trust him in ways she never thought possible, and the outcome would shape the future of the Empire itself. Days passed since the orbital station crisis. The Zarathi Empire had regained stability, but for Lady Kaylara nothing felt the same. She could not stop thinking about Jalen Hart, the human who had challenged everything she believed. His calm intelligence, his ingenuity, and his quiet confidence lingered in her mind like a persistent spark she could not extinguish. Kaylara had never allowed herself to feel admiration for anyone in such a personal way, and yet she could not deny it now. Her pride struggled against curiosity, and her logic battled with emotions she had spent a lifetime suppressing. Jalen, unaware of her inner conflict, continued his work across the Empire. He moved from project to project, quietly observing problems, analyzing solutions, and implementing improvements that even the most skilled Zarathi engineers had overlooked. Yet he always remained humble, never boasting, never seeking recognition beyond the results he achieved. One morning, Kaylara summoned him to her private quarters. "There is a new project," she said, her tone formal, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of something else. "A colony requires restructuring of its energy and environmental systems. I want you to lead the redesign." Jalen nodded. "I will do what I can." "You will not be alone," Kaylara added. "I will observe and assist where needed. You have impressed me, human, but I am not yet convinced I understand your methods." He looked at her, his expression calm. "Perhaps understanding is not necessary. Results speak louder than explanation." Kaylara studied him for a moment, then allowed a small smile. She realized she was intrigued, not just by his skill, but by the way he carried himself, the way he solved problems without arrogance. She had expected a human to be inferior, yet here was one who commanded respect effortlessly. The journey to the colony was long, through the expanse of space dotted with glowing nebulae. Kaylara and Jalen traveled together, observing systems and discussing potential improvements. It was the first time Kaylara allowed herself to speak freely with him, without maintaining the mask of scorn. "You approach problems differently than anyone I've seen," she said quietly. "Most of my people rely on precision, calculation, and rules. You combine them, but also add something else. Intuition, perhaps." Jalen considered her words. "Perhaps. Humans rely on observation and experience as much as calculation. We adapt when rules fail." Kaylara looked out the window at the passing stars. "It is unsettling to admit it, but your species possesses qualities we have overlooked. Qualities that even my people cannot replicate." Jalen smiled faintly. "I do not seek to unsettle anyone. I simply apply what I know." When they arrived at the colony, the challenges became immediate. Energy grids were failing, environmental controls fluctuated, and automated systems struggled to maintain life support functions. Jalen moved among the machinery with quiet authority, assigning tasks, explaining processes, and predicting failures before they occurred. Kaylara observed closely, stepping in when necessary, and quickly realized that her initial assumptions about humans had been wrong. Jalen's methods were not just effective, they were transformative. The colony system stabilized far faster than any Zarathi engineer could have managed alone. At one point, a critical energy node threatened to overload. The engineers froze, unsure of how to respond. Jalen stepped forward calmly, rerouting energy through auxiliary circuits, balancing the flow in ways the Zarathi had not considered. The node stabilized and the potential disaster was averted. Kalara's chest tightened with something she did not recognize. Pride, relief? Perhaps both. But more than anything, she felt a growing admiration she could not ignore. Over the next several days, Kalara spent more time with Jalen. They discussed technology, strategy, and even their cultures. She had never allowed herself such openness with anyone outside her family, and yet she found it natural with him. "You see the world differently," she said one evening, as they walked along the colony's observation deck. "Where my people see limits, you see possibilities. Where we see failure, you see opportunity." Jalen shrugged. "Perhaps that is the difference between our species. We have learned that survival depends on adaptation. That is our strength." Kalara considered his words, feeling a spark of something she could not name. She found herself wanting to learn more, not just about his methods, but about him. Not about the human as an engineer, but the human as a person. One night, a sudden storm erupted over the colony. Automated shields began to falter, and environmental systems threatened to collapse. Kalara and Jalen rushed to the control center, working side by side to stabilize the systems. "Adjust the secondary nodes here," Jalen instructed. "Balance the energy through the auxiliary channels." Kalara followed his directions, her hands steady. Together, they worked in perfect coordination, stabilizing the colony's systems before the storm could cause serious damage. When the storm passed, the colony was intact. The engineers cheered quietly, but Kalara remained focused on the human beside her. She realized with startling clarity that she had come to rely on him, not just for his skill, but for his calm, his judgment, his presence. "You are remarkable," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I did not expect to feel this way about a human, and yet I do." Jalen looked at her calmly, his eyes reflecting quiet understanding. "It is not weakness to respect what others can do, Lady Kalara. It is intelligence." Her chest tightened. She did not respond, but her mind raced. Admiration had grown into something more profound, something she could not control. She found herself thinking about him even when he was not present, imagining what it would be like to see the galaxy through his eyes. The following days solidified their bond. Kalara and Jalen worked together on new projects, traveled between colonies, and faced challenges that required cooperation, trust, and shared decision-making. Every obstacle they overcame strengthened their mutual respect, and an unspoken connection began to form. Yet Kalara struggled internally. Her pride, her upbringing, and the expectations of her society warned her against forming attachment to a human. She had scorned his species once, believing them weak, and yet now she found herself drawn to him in ways she had never experienced. One evening, as they returned to the capital, Kalara spoke quietly. "You have changed my perspective, human. I can no longer dismiss your species as weak, perhaps. I never should have." Jalen looked at her, his expression calm, but his eyes held quiet warmth. "It is not a matter of dismissal, Lady Kalara. Humans have always been capable. You are only now beginning to see it." Kalara's heart raced, and she felt a flutter of something unfamiliar. Curiosity, admiration, and perhaps the beginnings of something deeper. She could not yet name it, but she sensed its power. The bond between them grew silently, forged through challenges, trust, and shared victories. Each day, Kalara saw more of what humans could accomplish. Each day, she realized that Jalen was not just extraordinary. He represented the potential of an entire species that had been underestimated for centuries. By the time they returned to the capital, the council had noticed changes as well. The human's influence had grown. His methods had been implemented across colonies, improving efficiency, safety, and sustainability. Whispers spread among the nobles. Humans were capable, perhaps even extraordinary. Kalara, however, kept her focus on Jalen alone. The bond between them had deepened beyond professional respect. She admired his skill, trusted his judgment, and found herself thinking of him at times she did not expect. One night, standing on the balcony of her estate, Kalara allowed herself a single thought, one she had resisted for a long time. "This human is unlike anyone I have ever known. He is not weak. He is not inferior. He is remarkable." And with that thought, a quiet determination settled in her heart. She would continue to work with him, to observe him, and to challenge him. Because if humans could accomplish so much already, what more might they achieve together? Little did Kalara know, the final challenge loomed closer, one that would test their bond, their trust, and the potential of their combined strength in ways neither of them could yet imagine. The Zarathi Empire had never seen a human achieve so much. Across the colonies, reports flowed in. Systems improved, crises averted, and efficiency increased in ways no Zarathi engineer had predicted. And at the center of it all stood Jalen Hart, the human who had quietly changed the perception of his entire species. Lady Kalara watched him as he moved through the halls of her estate, coordinating new projects, offering guidance, and observing every detail with the calm precision that had won the Empire's admiration. She had long stopped trying to suppress her admiration. Now her feelings had grown deeper, though she refused to voice them. The moment came quietly, but it carried the weight of history. Kalara summoned Jalen to the private council chamber. Nobles, engineers, and officials gathered, curious and tense. Whispers ran through the room. The human had been called not to repair a system, but for something far more personal. Kalara began formally, her voice steady. The Empire has faced challenges we once believed insurmountable. Systems failed, colonies faltered, and yet through it all, one human has proven himself capable beyond expectation. Jalen Hart has shown ingenuity, courage, and resilience that surpasses what we believed possible. And now, she paused, letting her words sink in. All eyes turned to Jalen. He remained calm, standing tall, but his heart raced. He had expected recognition for his work, perhaps honors or gratitude, but not this. Kalara's gaze softened as she continued. Now I acknowledge that your bloodline is not weak. It is, in fact, superior in ways we did not anticipate. Your abilities, combined with your character, have earned the respect of this empire. And personally, you have earned my trust, my admiration, and more than that. The chamber fell silent. Nobles and officials exchanged stunned glances. Kalara stepped closer to Jalen, her posture revealing vulnerability she rarely showed. Human, she said quietly, almost to herself. I have scorned your kind. I have dismissed your bloodline as weak, but now I see the truth, and I wish for a bond that reflects this realization. A bond beyond duty or achievement. I ask, will you join me not just in alliance, but in partnership? Jalen's eyes widened slightly. He had expected challenges, not a personal request of this magnitude. He stepped forward, calm yet steady. Lady Kalara, I am honored by your trust and respect. I accept. A ripple of surprise and awe spread through the room. In the eyes of the Zarathi, an alliance like this was unprecedented. A human not only proving superiority through action, but also being recognized by one of the Empire's highest nobles. Time passed. Projects continued, but the bond between Kalara and Jalen deepened. The Empire watched as they worked side by side, combining human ingenuity with Zarathi precision. Systems improved, colonies thrived, and even skeptical nobles began to recognize the value of human capability. Months later, a new chapter began. Kalara and Jalen welcomed their first child, a symbol of unity, strength, and potential. The child's birth stirred the Empire not with scandal, but with awe. From the first moment, it was clear that this offspring carried the best of both species. Human resilience, ingenuity, and adaptability, combined with Zarathi intellect, precision, and grace. Kalara held her child, gazing down with a mixture of pride and wonder. She had once scorned humans, believing their bloodline weak. Now she held proof that her assumptions had been wrong. The child was not merely healthy or intelligent, it was exceptional. A living testament to the potential of combining two seemingly different species. Jalen stood beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Your instincts were right, he said softly. But so were yours, Kalara replied, her eyes shimmering. We have created something greater together, something the galaxy has never seen before. News of the child spread quickly. Scientists, nobles, and officials observed, studied, and marveled. The whispers that once scorned humans now praised them. The Empire's perception of humanity shifted entirely, acknowledging a species previously dismissed as weak as capable of greatness, brilliance, and legacy. Kalara watched her child take its first steps, and for the first time she allowed herself to hope, not just for her own family, but for the human species. She realized that the strength of a bloodline was not measured by genetics alone. but by courage, intellect, resilience, and the ability to overcome challenges. Humans had all of these qualities in abundance. As the child grew, it quickly became apparent that the offspring inherited the best traits of both parents. Its intelligence and curiosity were remarkable, and its resilience was unyielding. The child learned, observed, and solved problems in ways that left even seasoned Zarathi engineers amazed. Kelara turned to Jalen one evening as they watched their child experiment with a small energy module. "I once believed humans were weak," she said quietly. "I was wrong. You have proven that your species is capable of greatness, and now, our child will carry that legacy." Jalen smiled, his eyes reflecting pride and humility. Humans are strong when challenged. And strength is not just in the individual. It grows through unity, cooperation, and understanding. Together we have shown that the empire began to change. Policies shifted, colonies prospered, and humans received recognition previously thought impossible. Jalen's methods, combined with Kelara's leadership, reshaped the way the Zarathi approached problem-solving, technology, and even diplomacy. And through it all, the bond between Kelara and Jalen remained steadfast. It was built on respect, admiration, and shared victories. It was strengthened by challenges overcome together, and by the undeniable proof of human potential embodied in their child. Years later, as the child grew and began to take on responsibilities within the empire, Kelara and Jalen stood together on the balcony of their estate. The city below shimmered with light and energy, a testament to the union of human ingenuity and Zarathi precision. Kelara rested her hand on Jalen's shoulder, her expression calm but filled with quiet pride. "We have changed more than the perception of a species," she said softly. "We have changed the course of the empire itself, and it all began with a single human who refused to be underestimated." Jalen looked at her, a faint smile on his lips, and a noblewoman who was willing to see beyond her pride. Together they watched their child play among the machines and tools of innovation, a living symbol of possibility. The child's laughter echoed through the halls, a sound of hope and promise for the future. The story of Jalen Hart and Lady Kelara became legend. Humans, once dismissed as weak and insignificant, were now recognized as capable of brilliance, innovation, and leadership. The offspring of human and Zarathi bloodline symbolized the potential of unity, cooperation, and respect across species. And in the quiet moments, Kelara often reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from scorn and doubt to admiration, trust, and love. She realized that true strength was not measured by perfection or heritage, but by courage, intelligence, and the willingness to rise above expectation. The galaxy would never forget the human who changed everything. Not through violence or conquest, but through ingenuity, persistence, and the ability to inspire even the most skeptical to see the truth. Humans were capable of greatness, and as their child grew, the legacy of that greatness promised to shape the stars themselves. The once dismissed bloodline was no longer weak. It was a symbol of hope, strength, and the extraordinary potential of humanity.